The hangar, at the private airfield on the north side of Dallas, was cold enough that breath rose like thin smoke from the technicians, standing around the silver jet. Vanessa Hart stood at the foot of the boarding stairs in a black bodycon dress with a deep V neckline, arms folded, eyes sharp enough to cut steel. Her chief engineer had just told her, for the third time in 3 hours, that the aircraft could not safely fly. Behind her, 2 assistants tried to look busy. Behind them, a tall man in a wrinkled white shirt and worn leather shoes stood quietly with a small girl pressed against his leg. The girl held a stuffed rabbit with one ear half torn away. The man's name was Ethan Walker. He was 29 darn high. He had not asked to be here. He glanced at the diagnostic screen mounted on a rolling cart, then at the panel near the auxiliary bay and said, almost to himself, "It is not the main controller." His voice carried farther than he intended. Vanessa turned. She looked him up and down, the wrinkled shirt, the cheap shoes, the child clinging to his leg, and laughed. It was not a kind laugh. "You?" she said, loud enough for the kerosene-scented air to carry it across the hangar. "Fix my jet?" The little girl tightened her grip on her father's hand. Ethan said nothing. He only looked at the aircraft one more time, and at the engineers who would not meet his eyes, and at the woman in the expensive dress who had decided in 2 seconds that he was a joke. 15 minutes from that moment, no one in that hangar would be laughing. And the woman in the black dress would be the one with nowhere to look. Hours earlier, before the sun had cleared the rooftops of his neighborhood, Ethan had already been awake. His apartment was small, 2 rooms above a narrow side street. But it was clean, and the bookshelves were neat, and the window in Lily's room caught the morning light in a way that always made her smile when she sat up in bed. He moved through the kitchen the way a man moves when he has done the same thing every morning for 3 years. He filled the small kettle. He set out a juice box, a banana, and a plastic container with apple slices arranged in a careful crescent. On the counter beside the toaster, a folder of medical paperwork sat in the same place it had sat for weeks. He opened it once, checked the appointment date, and closed it. The pediatric pulmonologist in Colorado had a 6-month waiting list. They had finally been given a slot for that afternoon. He could not afford to miss it. He poured Lily's small glass of milk. Then his phone buzzed. He read the screen, and the muscles in his jaw set quietly. The commercial flight he had bought tickets for, the one he had budgeted for, the one he had checked twice before going to bed, had been canceled because of a scheduling conflict at the regional carrier. There was no rebooking option that would land them in Denver in time. He did not curse. He did not sit down. He stared at the message for a long second, then he put the phone face down on the counter and listened for movement from the bedroom down the hall. When he heard Lily yawn, he made himself smile before she came out, because she always read his face first thing in the morning, and she would worry if he looked the way he felt. She came into the kitchen with the rabbit under one arm, hair sticking up on one side, eyes full of sleep. "Are we going to be on time, Daddy?" she asked. "We are going to find a way," he said. It was not a promise made by a man who knew the answer. It was the kind of promise a father makes when he knows his daughter needs to hear something steady. Ethan had spent 3 years becoming very good at saying steady things. He picked up the phone again and dialed the only person he knew at the small private airfield where business jets came and went all day. Miles Carter, an old friend from another life, answered on the second ring. The private airfield on the north side of Dallas was the kind of place a person could not enter without an invitation. The lobby smelled like leather and cold coffee. Glass walls separated the public area from the hangar floor, and through those walls, a person could see jets being washed, fueled, and rolled out under a hard white ceiling of industrial light. By the time Ethan and Lily arrived, the woman who would soon laugh at him had already been standing in front of her aircraft for 2.5 hours, getting angrier by the minute. Vanessa Hart was 27, the youngest chief executive officer Hart Aerotech had ever named, and the only person in the building who could not afford for her morning to be going badly. The company had been her father's. He had built it from a single hangar and one repair contract into a serious player in regional aerospace logistics. He had also left it in a financial position that the board, in private memos she was not supposed to see, called fragile. A merger with a Seattle-based firm would close that afternoon if she could be in the room to sign. If she could not, 2 members of the board had already begun making phone calls she did not want to think about. Conrad Vail, the board's most patient and least friendly representative, had called her 4 times that morning. The 4th call she let go to voicemail. The 3rd call she had answered. "We have a window," he said, in the tone of a man not used to having his words repeated. "If you miss it, the window does not reopen tomorrow. You understand what is at stake." She understood. That was why she was standing in the cold of her own hangar, in heels, watching her chief engineer Gregory Sloan flip through diagnostic readouts, as if he could glare them into compliance. "Talk to me, Gregory," she said. "Tell me something I can use." "The fault keeps moving," Gregory said. He was 42, a careful man, not a panicked one. "The system reads it as a controller fault, but the codes are intermittent. I cannot put a passenger on this aircraft until I have a clean read." "How long?" "If we replace the controller, 2 days." "The part has to be flown in." "That is not an answer," Vanessa said. "That is the absence of an answer." She pressed the heel of her hand against her forehead and breathed once through her nose. She did not let her shoulders fall. The technicians were watching. Her assistants were watching. In her world, you did not show a crack to anyone who might one day vote on whether you kept your seat. Then a man in a wrinkled shirt walked past with a small girl and said, almost under his breath, that the controller was not the problem. Ethan had not meant to be heard. He had been walking the long way around the hangar with Miles, who was trying to find the supervisor who could possibly, squeeze 2 extra passengers onto a maintenance hop bound for a regional field in Colorado. The hop was a courtesy run, not a charter. There were no peanuts and no champagne. There was, Miles had warned him, almost no chance. But Lily was holding her rabbit, and Lily needed the appointment, and so Ethan had said yes to whatever almost no chance Miles could offer. While they walked, Ethan's eyes did what they had always done. He noticed the surface of the hangar floor where it sloped almost imperceptibly toward the drains. He noticed the temperature differential between the hangar interior and the cold pad outside, where the Silver Jet had spent the night before being towed in. He noticed a thin streak of moisture along the seam of an access panel near the auxiliary power compartment. He noticed a young technician wiping condensation from a cable junction with a paper towel and tossing the towel into a bin without writing anything down. He noticed all of these things the way a man notices the pattern in a piece of fabric he has worked with for many years. In a previous life, Ethan had been an aviation maintenance specialist in a branch of the United States military where the aircraft did not wait for parts and the pilots did not have the luxury of postponing a mission to the day after tomorrow. He had learned in that life that diagnostic computers were brilliant at finding problems that announced themselves and almost useless at finding problems that whispered. He had also learned that moisture, vibration, and a sudden change in temperature could make a perfectly healthy main controller send confused signals home. He paused near the diagnostic cart only because Lily had stopped to look at the underside of the jet's wing. She was small, and the wing was high, and she had never seen a private aircraft from this close. He let her have the moment. While she stared upward, he tilted his head and read the rolling fault log on the cart. The codes were not stable. They came and went in clusters, and the clusters tracked, almost exactly, the time the aircraft had been towed from the cold pad into the warm hangar. He spoke quietly to Miles. "If it were mine," he said, "I would check the auxiliary signal return before I replaced anything." Miles, who had not heard Ethan use that voice in almost a decade, looked up sharply. He started to speak. Before he could, Gregory Sloan, who had been within 10 feet of the cart, turned and looked at the man in the wrinkled shirt with the little girl beside him, and said in a tone that was not yet hostile but was not friendly either, "And you are who?" Ethan apologized for the interruption. He said he was sorry, that he had not meant to speak out of turn. But Vanessa Hart had heard him too. Vanessa walked toward the diagnostic cart, with the kind of measured stride her father had once taught her was how a leader entered a room she did not yet own. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The hangar went quieter at her approach, the way a forest goes quiet at the approach of weather. She looked at Ethan first, top to bottom, the wrinkled shirt with the cuffs rolled twice, the dark trousers that had been pressed at home, not at a cleaner, the leather shoes that had been polished but not replaced, the canvas bag over his shoulder, the one with a small pediatric inhaler peeking out of the side pocket, the little girl with the worn rabbit, the complete absence of any badge or credential or aerospace company lanyard. Then she looked at his face, calm, attentive, not afraid of her, and decided in 2 seconds that whatever he had said could not possibly matter. "Are you the engineer assigned to my aircraft?" she asked. "No," Ethan said. "Do you have a current certification that allows you to touch any part of my aircraft?" "I would not touch anything without permission." "And yet," Vanessa said, "you have an opinion. I have a suggestion." She let the corner of her mouth lift. The smile was not warm. It was the smile of a person too tired to be cruel on purpose, and just tired enough to be cruel without thinking about it. She turned to her chief engineer and to the cluster of technicians who had drifted closer. "Listen to this," she said. "We have engineers, we have technicians, we have a maintenance contract that costs more per month than most of you make in a year. But maybe what we needed all along was a man who hitched a ride with his daughter." A few people laughed. They did not laugh loudly. They laughed the way employees laugh when their boss has made a joke at someone else's expense, and they need to be heard laughing without committing to it. Henry Bishop, the airfield's head of security, did not laugh. He just looked at Ethan the way a doorman looks at a person who is about to be politely escorted out. Lily understood the laugh before she understood the words. She did not know what a private jet cost. She did not know what a chief executive officer was. But she knew the sound of grown people laughing at her father, and she knew that the woman in the black dress had been the one to start it. Her small hand tightened in Ethan's larger one until her knuckles paled. Vanessa was not finished. "You?" she said, looking back at Ethan. "Fix my jet?" "I do not know who you are trying to impress, but this is not an old car in your garage." She said it loud enough that her own voice surprised her, just a little, on the way out. It hung in the air for 1 second. Then, for 2. Ethan did not answer. He bent down instead and adjusted the small scarf around Lily's neck. He smoothed it where it had bunched against her collar. He said softly, in a voice meant only for her, "It is all right, sweetheart. People only get afraid like that when they have run out of time." Lily looked up at him. Her eyes had gone glassy in the way of a child who has just understood, all at once, that the adults around her are not all kind. She did not cry. Her father had taught her, gently, over many small evenings, that crying when other people had decided to be unkind was a way of giving them the day. She tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "let us just go. I do not want them to laugh at you." It was the smallest sound in the hangar. It traveled the way small sounds in cold spaces sometimes travel. A technician near the cart heard it. Then a young assistant in a navy blazer heard it. Then Gregory Sloan heard it, and his face changed in a way Vanessa did not see because Vanessa was still looking at Ethan. Ethan crouched. He did not crouch quickly, the way a man crouches to scoop up a child and leave. He crouched the way a man crouches when he is going to tell his daughter something she will remember for the rest of her life. "Lily," he said, "listen to me." She listened. "Some people," he said, "look at a person's clothes, or the car they drive, or the way they carry their groceries home, and they decide they know everything about that person. They do that because it is easier than asking. We do not have to be like them. And we do not have to make ourselves small because they made themselves loud. Do you understand?" She nodded, slowly, the rabbit pressed against her chin. "But Daddy," she said, "can you fix it? They're playing?" He thought about how to answer her. He could have said yes. He could have said that he had fixed harder things in worse places, at worse times. He did not. He said only, "I think I know where to look." That was the moment Vanessa, watching the two of them from a distance of 10 feet, felt something move in her chest that she did not want to feel. The man in the wrinkled shirt had not raised his voice at her. He had not snapped at his daughter. He had not used the moment to perform humility for the people watching. He had simply chosen, in front of a child, to not be cruel back to a woman who had been cruel first. It made her, for the first time that morning, feel something other than busy. Then her phone buzzed. Conrad Vale again. The board. The Seattle window. The merger that would either save the company her father had built or split it into pieces by Friday. She closed her eyes for 1 second, and when she opened them, the soft thing in her chest had been pushed back down into a place she did not have time to look into. She turned to Ethan. Her voice was not warm. But it was different. "Where?" she said. "Do you want to look?" Gregory Sloan stepped forward before Ethan could answer. He spoke to Vanessa in the careful voice of a man who has been with the company longer than its current chief executive officer, and who is about to risk telling her something she does not want to hear. "The codes are not consistent," Gregory said. "If he is right about the auxiliary signal return, we have been about to replace a controller that is fine. I would like 10 minutes to test his idea before we order the part." 10 minutes, Vanessa said. 15 to be safe. She looked at Ethan. 15, she said. You have 15 minutes. You will be supervised by Gregory at all times. You will not touch anything that he does not authorize. If you waste my time, Henry will walk you and your daughter out of this building, and you will not be back. Understood, Ethan said. He stood. He did not stand the way a man stands who feels he has just been given a victory. He stood the way a man stands who has just been given 15 minutes and a daughter who needs to be in Denver before dinner. He turned to Miles. "Stay with her," he said quietly. Lily did not want to let go of his hand. "Daddy," she said. "I am right there," he said, and he pointed across the open floor to the access panel near the auxiliary bay. "Right there. Not anywhere else. I will look up every 2 minutes, and I will see you, and you will see me. All right?" She nodded. Miles, who was 45, who had watched a younger Ethan handle worse rooms in worse uniforms, took the little girl's hand with the gentleness of a man who has nieces. "Come on," he said to her. "We will count the planes." Vanessa watched Ethan walk to the aircraft. She watched the way the technicians made way for him without being asked. She did not yet understand why. She thought, for one bitter moment, that they were getting out of the way of what was about to be a very public failure. Then she watched him stop at the cart, look once at Gregory, and ask 3 questions in a quiet voice. He asked when the aircraft had been pulled in from the cold pad. He asked the temperature inside the hangar at the time. He asked at what point in the warming cycle the first fault code had appeared. Gregory answered each question. After the third answer, Gregory's shoulders relaxed about half an inch. Vanessa, who had spent her entire adult life learning to read very small physical signals from men who would not tell her what they were thinking, saw it. It was not a relaxation of relief. It was the relaxation of a chief engineer who had just realized, in the space of 3 questions, that he was no longer the most senior aviation mind in the room. Ethan asked Gregory to bring up the fault history in time order. He did not look at the most recent codes. He looked at the first ones. Then he looked at the gap between the first cluster and the second. Then he looked at the third. "They climb after the tow," he said. "They flatten when the aircraft sits. They climb again when the auxiliary cycles." "That is correct," Gregory said. "Did the aircraft pass its last scheduled inspection 2 weeks ago?" "Clean." "Then it is unlikely to be the controller." Controllers do not pass an inspection 1 week and stage a temperature-dependent failure the next without any preceding indication. We would have seen at least one flag. A senior technician, an older man named Harlan who had been with the company for 23 years, made a soft sound at the back of his throat. It was not a friendly sound. He stepped forward. "Listen," he said. "I do not know who you are, but we do not let walk-ins draw conclusions about a $14 million aircraft. I have run this fleet's diagnostics for 17 years. If the box says controller, the box says controller." Ethan turned to him without heat. "Sir," he said, "I am not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust the data. The codes are not behaving the way a controller fault behaves. They are behaving the way an interference issue behaves. We can confirm it or rule it out in 8 minutes. If I am wrong, you will know in 8 minutes. If I am right, you will not have to charter a part in from another state." Harlan opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Then he stepped back half a step, which from a man of his rank in this hangar was the same thing as a polite agreement to wait and see. Ethan turned back to the aircraft. He pointed, without touching anything, at the seam of the access panel near the auxiliary bay. "There is moisture along that seam," he said. "Not a lot." "Enough." "We checked the panel," a younger technician said. "Sealed." "The panel is sealed," Ethan said. "The harness behind it may not be." When the aircraft sat outside in the cold last night, condensation formed along the inner surface of that compartment. When you towed it inside, the differential accelerated. If a connector in there has a degraded shield, the auxiliary signal return is going to write a very small amount of induced noise into the controller. The controller is going to read that noise as a fault and post a code. The code will look real because the noise is real. The controller is fine. The shield is not. Gregory was nodding now without realizing he was doing it. "I want to scope the auxiliary return," he said. "Just to confirm." He looked at Vanessa. "With your permission, ma'am." Vanessa had folded her arms. She had not moved in 2 minutes. She gave one short nod. Gregory called over a technician with a portable signal analyzer. The technician looked at Ethan, then at Gregory, then back at Ethan. He set up the analyzer where Ethan asked him to set it up. He ran the test where Ethan asked him to run it. The first read showed nothing. The second read showed a faint pattern of induced interference exactly along the line Ethan had described. The third read confirmed it. The hangar did not erupt. There was no cheering. People who work around expensive machinery for a living do not cheer when a problem turns out to be smaller than they thought. They go quiet, and the quiet is its own kind of acknowledgement. Gregory ordered the suspect connector pulled and inspected. The technician who had pulled it found on the inner surface of the shield a hairline crack about the length of a fingernail. Moisture had been finding its way in for, conservatively, weeks. The connector was replaced from the hangar's own stock. The replacement took 11 minutes. It cost less than the lunch the chief financial officer of Hart Aerotech had charged on his company card the day before. They ran the diagnostic cycle again. The first 3 codes that had been blinking red on the display flickered, hesitated, and went amber. Then the next 2 went amber. Then the entire column dropped to green in a single sweep. The auxiliary unit hummed up smoothly, settled into its idle frequency, and held there with the unbothered steadiness of a system that had never actually been broken. A young technician muttered, "That is not possible," and immediately wished he had not said it out loud. Ethan asked for one more cycle to be sure. They ran it. The aircraft came up clean. Gregory Sloan stepped back from the cart. He turned to Ethan, and he did something that the people who had worked under him for years would later describe as the most honest thing they had ever seen him do. He held out his hand. "You just saved us from replacing a controller that was fine," he said. "Thank you." Ethan took the offered hand. He did not say much. He said, "Glad it worked." Then he turned and looked across the hangar, past the bewildered technicians and past the silent assistants in their navy blazers, to where his daughter was standing with Miles, both of her small hands pressed against her cheeks in the way of a child watching a magic trick come true. He smiled at her. She ran to him. She did not say anything dramatic. She wrapped both arms around his leg and pressed her face into his hip, and she said, in a voice loud enough that the woman in the black dress heard every word, "I knew you could, Daddy." I knew you could. Ethan put his hand on the back of her head and held her there, and for 1 second the entire hangar belonged to a single father and a 6-year-old in a worn coat with a stuffed rabbit. Vanessa Hart, who had built her career on never letting her face show what she was feeling, did not entirely succeed in that moment. Her mouth opened slightly. She closed it. She looked at the floor for 2 seconds, which for a person of her training was the equivalent of looking at the floor for an hour. Conrad Vale called for the 5th time. She did not pick up. She did not even look at the screen. She walked toward Ethan and his daughter slowly. The hangar made way for her the way it had made way for him. When she stopped, she was about 3 feet from where they stood. She did not start with him. She started with the little girl. "What is your name?" she asked, and her voice had been pulled down half an octave from where it had been earlier. It was a voice she did not use often. "Lily," the girl said. "Lily, my name is Vanessa." She paused. "I owe your father an apology. And I owe you one too. I said something earlier that I should not have said in front of you." "I am sorry." Lily looked up at her father before she answered. Ethan gave the smallest nod. The girl turned back to Vanessa. She did not smile. She did not need to. "My daddy does not like making people feel bad," Lily said. "Even when they are mean. He says it is not the way." It was the kind of sentence only a 6-year-old can say without irony. It went into Vanessa Hart like a thin needle in a place she had not realized was open. She held the girl's gaze for a long moment. Then she looked up at Ethan. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Ethan is fine. Ethan. She drew a breath. "I judged you by what you were wearing. I judged you in front of your child. I was wrong on both counts. I am sorry." He nodded once. He did not make her work for the acceptance. Apology accepted. It was that simple. He did not lecture her. He did not extract any concession. He did not draw it out so the people watching could enjoy it. The technicians, who had expected something else, looked at one another in a way that suggested they were beginning to revise their understanding of who the most dignified person in the hangar had been all morning. Gregory was the one who finally asked the question they had all been trying not to ask. "Where," he said, "did you train?" Ethan glanced at Lily. He did not love telling this part of his story in front of strangers. He had not told it in any detail, even to friends, in the better part of 3 years. But Miles had drifted closer, and Miles, who had been waiting patiently for the moment, finally spoke for him. "He served," Miles said simply. "Aviation maintenance specialist." His unit fixed aircraft that did not have the option of waiting for parts. People came home because of work he did. That is most of what I am allowed to say. "I left," Ethan added, when he saw the question forming on Vanessa's face, "after my wife died. Lily was 3. She needed a father who came home every night, not a father who flew out of touch for weeks. So I came home, and I stayed home. I do small jobs now. They pay the bills. They let me be here." Vanessa Hart, who had spent the morning being told that her schedule was the most important schedule in the building, said nothing for what felt to everyone in the hangar like a long time. Then she said, in a voice that the technicians later swore they had never heard her use before, "Thank you for staying home." She meant it about Lily. Lily, who knew it, looked up at her father and quietly let go of his hand for the first time in an hour. Conrad called again. Vanessa picked up. She listened for 9 seconds. Then she said, "Conrad, I am going to land in Seattle tonight, and the merger will be signed tonight. But before that I am routing through Colorado. There is a child on this aircraft who has a doctor's appointment, and I am not missing that appointment. Adjust the schedule." She hung up before he could answer. Ethan tried to refuse. He said it was unnecessary. He said he could find another way. He said she did not owe him anything. She let him finish. "You just saved my company from a 2-day delay that would have cost the merger," she said. "You did it for free. You did it after I insulted you in front of your daughter. The least I can do is fly your daughter to her doctor. Ethan looked at Lily. Lily looked at the silver jet. Lily had never been in a private aircraft, and she had been told, more than once, by other children in her grade, that some children fly on their own planes and some children do not. She did not let herself ask. But Ethan saw her face, and he made the call a father makes when a small kindness is being offered to his child by a person who can afford it, and who, for once that day, deserved to be allowed to give it. "All right," he said. The flight lifted off 40 minutes later. Vanessa took the seat opposite the two of them. The cabin was quiet, the kind of quiet that only well-built aircraft and heavy pile carpet can produce. Lily sat against her father, the rabbit on her lap, the little inhaler tucked in the seat pocket where she could reach it. The cabin attendant brought her warm milk in a real mug. She held it with both hands. Vanessa did not pretend to do work. She watched them, not in a way that was strange, but in the way a person watches something they had not known they were missing. She watched Ethan check the inhaler without making a fuss of it. She watched him tuck Lily's blanket under her elbow before she could ask. She watched him answer the same question about how high they were flying for the third time, without any change in his voice. After a while she said, "Most people would have walked out." He looked at her. "You apologized," he said. "And my daughter is on her way to her doctor." "Why would I be carrying anything else? Because I deserved it," Vanessa said. "Because most people would have wanted me to feel it." He thought about that. Then he said, "Lily is going to grow up watching how I treat people who treat me badly. She is 6. She is taking notes I do not even know she is taking. If I let myself be cruel to you because you were cruel to me, she will think that is what strength looks like. I do not want her to grow up thinking that." Vanessa did not answer for a long time. The aircraft passed through a thin layer of cloud, and the cabin filled with soft white light, and Lily fell asleep against her father's shoulder. Vanessa watched the man and his daughter, and she said, very quietly, almost to herself, "I think you do not just fix airplanes." Ethan did not answer her in words. He only looked at her, briefly, and then looked back down at his daughter. He smoothed Lily's hair away from her forehead. He adjusted the blanket again. He did not need to say anything, because both of them already knew that something had quietly begun in that cabin that neither of them was going to be able to undo. The jet flew on, into a sky that had cleared into pale, clean blue. Ahead of them was Colorado, and a small clinic, and a doctor who had been waiting 6 months to see a little girl with a stuffed rabbit. Behind them was Dallas, and a hangar where, for the rest of that working day, no one would look at a wrinkled white shirt the same way again. Vanessa Hart had thought when she woke up that morning that she needed a private jet to save her company. She had been wrong. What she had needed was the man she had laughed at in front of his child. And the man had only ever needed one thing: to get his daughter to her doctor on time. He had done that. The rest, he would let the days decide.